Hello, good morning. So in this video, we will discuss all about the decisions under certainty, and this includes the evaluation of mutually exclusive alternatives, individual project analysis, depreciation, after-tax analysis, replacement studies, and break-even analysis. So this is the longest discussions that we will be having in this subject, and I hope na ma-discuss natin everything because if not, then we will have to administer online class. So hopefully matapos natin within the week. I want to upload the videos. Okay, so without further ado, let's proceed to the major topic here, which is all about the evaluation of mutually exclusive alternatives. So when we talk about alternatives, from the word itself, parang siyang root word niya na alternate, di ba? When you have, let's say, di ba, meron kayong password sa inyong mga accounts, let's say mga emails, di ba? We usually select a certain alternate email, di ba? So parang yun yung concept ng alternatives. We do have a lot of options, okay? And you can just imagine these alternatives being options. Let's say option A, option B, option C. So you have a lot of options, and then given that these options are profitable enough, what could be the best alternative or the best option that you have to select in order to maximize your profit or your benefits? So this is what we'll be dealing with in these discussions. Ano ba yung best natin na option na pwede nating piliin from all the alternatives that we have? And when we say the alternatives are mutually exclusive, yung selection ng isang alternative would exclude of course the choice of any other. So yun yung ibig sabihin lang ng mutually exclusive. So parang pumili ka na ng isa, then exclude na natin yung the rest. So parang dito ka na lang mag-focus, and then you try to evaluate the other factors that you have. Okay? And then this is the parang grandfather natin, parang idea, no? Pag meron tayong evaluation of mutually exclusive alternatives, if the extra benefits obtained by reading this green sentence. So, if the extra benefits obtained by investing additional capital are better than those that could be obtained from investment of the same capital elsewhere in a company of that certain MARR, then the investment should be made. Under that sentence, meron tayong rules na kailangang tandaan. There are only two rules, di ba? So the first rule is when the revenues, so ito na yung parang natin, mga kinita, no? When the revenues and other economic benefits, so ito yung parang mga positive cash, parang cash inflow natin, no? Are present and vary among the alternatives, choose the alternative that maximizes overall profitability. That is, select the alternative that has the greatest positive equivalent worth at I is equal to MARR and satisfy all project requirements. Of course, the project depends upon the company, but you do have certain something like custom requirements. It doesn't actually reflect to all the certain project. It depends on the company, but the main goal here is that if we try to compute for the equivalent worth, remember we do have a lot of equivalent worth. Let's say present worth, future worth, but they are all just equivalent worth. So if we do have a lot of equivalent worth, just compare the greatest value of that equivalent worth, and we'll be selecting that as our best option, and something like we should go with that project. And then for rule number 2, if it's impossible, so when the revenues and other economic benefits are not present or are constant among the alternatives, so pare-pares sila ng benefits and revenue, so walang sense kasi hindi natin siya makakompare. We need to consider only the costs and select the alternative that minimizes total cost. That is, select the alternative that has the least negative equivalent worth at I is equal to MAR and satisfies all the project requirements. So that means na kung wala tayong equivalent worth, that is, hindi natin makonsider yung mga benefits natin. Kasi, for example, walang given, hindi natin makonsider yung mga cash inflows natin. So lahat na lang ang cash outflows natin, considering yung mga capital investment natin. So yun yung ating ko-consider, lahat ng costs natin. And then, of course, kung alin dito yung pinakamababa, then that is the best option that we have to go. So, again, ang pinakaiba nito sa ating previous discussions that we're trying to evaluate yung single project lang before, but now we will try to evaluate a lot of projects and then we select the best option for that. Now, ito yung mga factors na we consider. So, pakibasa na lang yan. Hindi ko na yun i-explain thoroughly kasi naman yan, self-explanatory. And then, I'll be proceeding with the study period or the analysis period kasi this is very important before we try to compare. So, alam naman natin, di ba, na in order for us to compare anything, di ba, anything, we have to set the same parameters. For example, gusto mong mag-compare ng, let's say, grades mo, di ba? So, syempre, dapat same course kayo. Same din kayo ng curriculum, same din kayo ng school. As in, ka-batch mo. Doon dapat yung compare mo, di ba? Same ng professor. Kasi, you can't do comparison when there are a lot of factors that are really different, di ba? For example, compare natin yung yung setting namin before kasi sa inyo. So, 'di ba, that is very impossible to compare kasi we do have a lot of certain factors na kino-consider and that is quite impossible for us to have that common denominator na it is still the same thing, 'di ba? That also works for engineering economics and engineering economy analysis, 'di ba? The study period is one of the factors na kailangan talaga nating iset as constant dito. But there are of course cases na magkakaiba yung study period natin kasi what if ang planning horizon mo is 10 years tapos the other one is just 5 years. So what happens to that? So we have to make sure na we do have a lot of something like common denominator with this comparison. So again, yung study period natin, we call this the planning horizon. So you can see it from here. And then this is the selected period over which mutually exclusive alternatives are compared. So in short, ito yung parang parang magko-compare tayo. So within this year, so i-compare natin 'yan, no. So meron lang tayong dalawang case, no. The first one is that if the useful lives are the same for all alternatives and equal to the study period. So the second one is the useful lives are unequal among the alternatives and at least that one does not match with the study period. So again, yung ating useful life, usually ito yung parang pwede natin gamitin let's say equipment. But study period can exceed to that useful life, no. Pero if ever the useful life is equal to the study period, and this is the same for all the alternatives. Let's say, ang useful life ni equipment A is 5 years, the same na the study period, and then that's the same for B, for C, for D. So we don't have any problem with comparing because the study period and the useful life or lives of them are actually equal. So mas madali ating comparison kasi same lang sila. But what if iba sila? Let's say yung study period mo is 10 years but the useful life is just 6 years. Then the other way around, kung yung isa naman yung study period mo is kind of different. Well, usually yung study period kasi natin is same lang naman usually natin for all alternatives. Usually ganun ginagawa natin. Pero yung useful life kasi mostly yun yung nagkakaiba talaga. But then again, if we want to compare these things and iba na talaga agad sila, so papasok kayo sa number 2 which is unequal yung ating mga alternatives, yung useful life and study period nating alternatives. So basta pag hindi sila equal, dito tayo sa pangalawa. So meron ditong mas detailed explanation nito naka-green. Usually ito yung mga naka-green yung mga kailangan nating tandaan, no. Unequal lives among alternatives somewhat complicate their analysis and comparison. To conduct engineering economy analysis, in such cases, we adopt the rule of comparing mutually exclusive alternatives over the same period of time. So later on, I'll show you how it is done, but we still have to proceed muna with the assumptions that we do when we actually encounter these unequal alternatives or equal alternatives naman. So we do have a lot of assumptions that we do, So the first one is the repeatability assumptions and then the co-terminated assumptions for the second one. So for the repeatability assumptions, there are two main conditions na ginagawa natin. The first one is that the study period over which the alternatives are being compared is either indefinitely long or equal to a common multiple of the lives of the alternatives. So, unahin natin yung study period natin na indefinitely long. So, for example, meron kang certain project and then you want to evaluate this until gusto mong mabuhay. So, that is considered indefinitely long, diba? So, parang parang infinite yung ating time frame dito na study period. Again, we're talking about study period here, not useful life. So, yung study period natin is kung hanggang kailan mo siya gustong pag-aralan and then go. Pero useful life nito doesn't mean na yung ating useful life is also infinite. But that's just the case. So, pag kasi yung ating alternatives A, B, C have study period na mahaba sila, so that is considered under the repeatability assumption na agad. Well, of course, kasi nga, yung study period natin is constant all throughout the alternatives. Or it could be that we have equal to a common multiple of the lives of the alternatives. So, let's say halimbawa meron tayong study period na 9 years, okay? And then yung ating life or useful life of that certain project is just 3. years. So, and then yung other project would be, hindi, gawin natin 18 years study period, tapos meron tayong useful life na 3 and then 6 dun sa isa. So, as you can see, yung ating useful life is actually a multiple of, or baliktad ako. Basta, kasi pwedeng parang times 6 nung ating useful life is the study period. Dun sa pangalawa naman, 6 times 3 is our study period using that useful life. So that means na meron tayong common multiple nung life, which is actually 3 years. And that makes sense na we could still use the repeatability assumption. So kung halimbawa, kung ano man nangyari dun sa 3 years span nung project A na yon, and then, di ba sabi natin 18-year study period. So, we'll try to replicate that 3 years na 6 na beses. Hoping na we do have repeatability assumption. So, that is that term kung bakit naging, kung bakit naging repeatability assumption. So, parang ito yun ha. For example, this is your, let's say, from 0 to 18 yung inyong study period. And then, meron ka lang, let's say, 3 years for your project. So, itong 3 years na to, we will try to replicate this into 6 times, parang gano'n, para maging 18 siya. Parang hindi ata sakto tong 18. But then, so magiging 6, and then magiging 9, and then, so hindi na kasha. But that's the idea, no? Kung ano man yung cash flow dito na nangyari, we will try to replicate that here para magkaroon tayo ng certain correct assumption. That's why we have that repeatability assumption, because we're trying to repeat what is happening whenever we have a multiple of that study period. Okay, and then what's next here is all about this economic consequences that are estimated to happen in an alternative's initial useful life. Actually, ito pala yun. Sinabi pala dito yun eh. Ayun, so yun yung pangalawa. Since nga nag-try tayo ng repeatability assumption, and then that's a multiple of your study period. So, kung ano man nangyari dun sa cash flow diagram within that certain original period niya, which is useful life niya within, let's say, 3 years or 5 years, or 6 pala kasi hindi pwede yung 5. So, we'll try to repeat that. Ganun lang. Ulitin lang natin siya. Okay? Para magkaroon tayo ng ating whole estimate within the study period na sinet natin para maging equal sila. Okay? So, ganun lang siya ka-simple. And then, what's next? The co-terminated assumption. So, we're done with the repeatability assumption, and this one is the co-terminated assumption. And ito yung una natin gagawin muna, co-terminated assumption, kasi this is the easiest one. Kasi when we say co-terminated assumptions, we do have a useful lives that are equal to the study period. So, wala ka ng problema sa study period kasi nga, kung ano yung study period mo, yun din yung useful life. And then, those are equal to our, to all the alternatives that you have actually. So, let me just read this, no? It uses a finite and identical study period for all the alternatives, and this planning horizon, combined with appropriate adjustments to the estimated cash flows, goods, and alternatives on a common and comparable basis. When the useful life of an alternative is equal to the selected study period, so ito yon, yung useful life equal to study period, adjustments to the cash flow are not required. So, ito yung pinakamadali nating evaluation. Again, ulitin ko, useful life is the life na nagagamit natin yung certain equipment, or hanggang doon natin pwedeng magkaroon tayo ng revenue, profit. So, usually, yun yung useful life natin. And then, after that, pero yung ating study period can exceed through this useful life. No? Depende kung paano natin siya pag-aaralan. Kasi yun nga, yung study period, parang from the word itself, study period. So, doon natin, check kung kailan ba maging profitable to. So, usually, nag-exceed siya. Pero for mutually exclusive alternatives, the co-terminated assumption, those are equal. So, sagutan natin ngayon yung number 1. For the table below, select the best option using MARR 10% per year for 4 years. Okay? And which of this is the base alternative? So, gawin natin ngayon is, ano ba yung ating base alternative? So, when we say base alternative, this is usually the parang least, parang worst option, parang ganon. So, sinabi natin base, halimbawa, meron kang, let's say, ang profit mo dun sa is 1,000. Ang profit mo dun sa pangalawa is 2,000. So, yung base mo is yung profit is 1,000 kasi yun yung parang worst option. Parang bakit naman worst? Parang less better option. Parang may ganun bang Pero para ganun na lang ang gawin natin. Para hindi siya masyadong negative. Parang siya yung base natin. Ibig sabihin, parang kung wala kang other alternatives, we proceed with that option. So, parang ganun na lang. Parang siya yung, ano bang tawag doon? Yung hindi siya yung priority, parang yun na lang, parang hindi siya yung priority, pero we can still choose that, no? So we call that the base alternative. And with this, let's try computing for it, no? Again, sabi natin sa rules, rule number 1, kapag meron tayong mga revenues, this is actually the revenue, and you can incorporate that in your computation. You will have to select the greatest value of your equivalent worth in this case. So the easiest one that we can always solve is the present worth. So with this case, let's solve for the present worth. We have the capital investments negative 60,000 and then annual revenues 22,000. So we could just have parang ibalik lang natin to present itong annual expenses natin and then subtract natin itong capital investment. So ito negative na siya, so you can just add it para maging minus. Pero ang point dyan is it's negative kasi sa cash outflow sa cash flow diagram, nasa cash outflow siya. So, parang ito, kung lalagay natin, edi nakaganyan siya, no? And then, meron tayong annual revenues na ito. So, yun. Natin ilagay. So, parang ganyan. 4 years ata siya. So, meron tayong 4 na ganyan. And then, ang gagawin mo lang naman is to bring this to your present. Okay? And then, you should be able to obtain yung, yung correct natin na present worth. So, if the cash, the annual revenues here is 22,000. So, 22,000 yan. Then, nagkaroon ka ng capital investment na 60,000. So, yung net nito would be your present worth. So, present worth for A simply equal to 60,000. Then, that should be, minus 60,000 pala dito. Unahin natin yung value ng, yung present worth for each annual revenues. So, that means na we have 22, parang pula ng, ko na naman. Anyway, so that's 22,000. Okay? And then we will be using yung, uniform series factor natin to obtain the present worth. So, that is multiplied by 1 minus 1 plus ang I natin is MAR, that's 0.10. Raised to negative 4 divided by 0.1. Okay? And then we subtract yung ating 60,000. Okay? And therefore, your present worth using your, for A, so that is 9,737.0398. Huwag pala natin i-box kasi hindi pala yun yung atin talagang pinaka final answer pa kasi we have to, of course, compute for B pa. Now, for PWB, so we just have to utilize yung given sa B with the same concept as A. So we have 26,225 multiplied by 1 minus 1 plus the MARR raised to negative 4, 0.1, and then we subtract yung kanyang investment cost. Okay, and this will give you your equivalent worth for alternative B. So that's 10,129.7213. Okay, so by just looking at your present worth, we can now compare, diba? Sabi kasi natin, rule number 1 states that if you have the revenues, you can find your equivalent worth and then compare with those two values with the greatest value. So from this, if you would be answering the question, which of these is the base alternative? So you would go for A. You will go for A because your A is actually the less better option because B is the better option here. And since sabi nga natin yung base alternative is yung parang hindi better option, so you go for A. That's why, ayun, yun din yung explanation dito. Because alternative has the lower PW, it is called the base alternative. And since B has the larger PW, it is the best option for this project. Yan, ganun lang siya kasimple, no? So, pag nagsasagot kayo, usually sentence siya. Explain nyo na, bawa, pinapapili kayo A or B. So, sabihin nyo is A, and then yung reason nyo, and then yung ayun, ganun lang siya. Kahit wala na itong second sentence, parang yung A okay na yan. Kasi yun lang naman yung tanong. Okay. So, hopefully, na-gets nyo yung ating evaluation under co-terminated assumption kasi we do have the same lang dito. Ito, hindi na nilagay natin study period kasi assuming na yan na same kasi, 4 years lang dito. So, parang paresa sila for both. Paresa sila for both. Ganun din yun eh. Paresa sila for each of this. Okay. And then for ilang ba examples to? So meron lang tayong 3 examples ito. So hopefully magets yun. Napakasimple lang niya, no. Ito number 3, ipapaubaya ko to sa inyo. Kasi ito naman is parang, given na yung PW, kayo na lang kailangan mag-evaluate niyan. So yung number 2 na lang sagutan ko for this. Sabi dito, select the best option using MAR is equal to 10% per year. Which of this is the base alternative? So, ano ulit gagawin natin? So we just have to compute for the PW for each of them. And then, sabi dito, yung A natin is market value. So, at the end of the useful life or the study period of 3 years, ito yung magiging salvage value nila. So, for C, we have 0. And then for D, we have 36,000. So, in short, yung ating alternative C has no salvage value while D has 26,000 useful life. So, yun yung kanyang yun yung kanyang yun yung kanyang useful life, sa salvage value. So, we need to compute for the PW in this case. So, kung mapapansin nyo, ito is negative. So, that is actually yung parang cost pa rin yan. For example, we do have, ito yung parang capital investment niya, 380,000. And then, meron tayong negative dito. So, cash outflow to. So, wala talaga tayong revenues dito. Meron lang tayo is more on expenses. Let's say maintenance. Let's say replacement. So, yan in negative. But, we can always try to compute for it, no? So, let's say, gawin natin yung letter C. Now, we create a cash flow diagram here. So, this is considered a cash outflow. So, downward sila lahat. Parang kanina, ang ginawa ko ata is baliktad yung viewpoint. Parang pataas ata yung, natin, yung cash outflow natin. So, well, pag ganun, di baliktad yung ating viewpoint. But, for this case kasi, since parang siya, expenses, so ibababa natin yung ating arrow. So yung cash inflow natin is pataas. So, ayun. So, tama din naman ako natin. Nabaliktad lang yung viewpoint. Anyway, it's always up to you naman kung ano yung best. Basta pagka revenues, kailangan kasalungat niya. Pag yung expenses, then dapat nasa kabilang side. Wala naman din kaso doon. Okay lang yan. So, this one is, this is your investment cost. And then this could be your annual cost, pero 38,100 to. This one is medyo lumaki siya, 39,100. And then finally, in the third year, we have 40,100. Siyempre, ito mas mababa pa dapat yan. But hindi naman kasha, so let's just stick with this. So we have 380,000 here. Pwede hindi nyo muna lagay yung negative, okay lang naman yun. And then 38,100. And then 39,100. And then 40,100. Now, kung mapapansin nyo, this one is actually a gradient kasi kapag tinignan nyo itong certain common value nila, diba, they have actually 38,000. So, meron tayong 1,000 gradient starting from the second year. So, we could utilize that formula, or you can, kung di nyo tanda yung gradient, then you can just simply use yung ating common formula na binabalik natin to the present. Okay? So, gawin ko siya ng two ways. So, yung for alternative C, I'll try to compute that using yung parang basic or manual method natin. So, the cost here. Cost yung ating usapan ngayon kasi wala tayong revenue. So, the cost. So, actually, dapat siya PW, but the cost. So, the cost for C is equal to 300 or negative 380,000. And then, i-add natin ngayon yung, or manually ko i-add ngayon yung mga expenses mo nila for 1, 2, 3 years. So, that's negative 38,100. And then, babalik ko sila. So, 1 year yun. 1 plus 0.1 raised to negative 1. And then, add ko ngayon ng negative 39,100. 1 plus 0.1 raised to negative 2. And then, add ko ngayon ulit yung 40,100 times 1 plus 0.1 raised to negative 3. Okay, so the cost for C is equal to 477,078.1367 pesos. Okay, so that is your capitalized cost. Now, let's compute this using naman yung ating gradient method. So, again, meron tayong negative 380,000. And then, di ba sabi natin sa gradient, add mo ngayon yung common payment dito, which is 38,100 kasi 1,000 yung gradient natin for each payment. So, we have negative 38,100, and then ilang beses ba siya nag-occur? So, 1, 2, 3. So, we have 1 minus 1 plus 0.1 raised to negative 3 divided by 0.1. Okay? And then, yung gradient natin is minus 1,000. Multiply natin sa 1 over I, that's 0.1. And then we multiply this by yung parang future natin na factor uniform. That's 1 plus 0.1 raised to n. And then yung n natin is 3 years. Minus 1 over 0.1. And then minus n. Okay. And then we further multiply this with 1 over 1 plus 0.1 raised to 3. Okay. So medyo mahaba-haba. Pero that's the formula. And then CC would be equal to, so parang compute lang natin siya, and then you should be able to obtain the same result. So that's 477,078.1367 pesos. Okay, so this is your formula using the gradient method. So kahit naman kung di nyo sa ulo, then you stick with the manual computation. It should give you the same result naman. Saka kung nahirapan kayong mag-devise or mag-generate ng formula from the given as well, then magmano-mano kayo. Kasi ganun lang naman lagi yung concept. Imamano-mano nyo siya pag di nyo tanda yung formula, diba? So, with this, we can now compute for the latter, which is actually yung ating alternative D. And we have to make sure na incorporate yung lahat nung expenses as well nung ating D. So, yung ating D, ito buburahin ko na siguro to. Okay, same lang naman din siya. So, yung ating D naman, kung mapansin nyo, uniform yung kanyang costs. So, kung gagawa tayo ng cash flow diagram, meron tayong certain initial investment here. And then, yung kanyang cash outflow sa 3 years ay parehas. So, we can just bring this back to your present. And then, we can determine yung total cost ng ating D. Okay, so from this, yung ating annual payment or annual cost is 27,400. Pero meron tayong salvage value that we have to consider here. So at the end of the 3rd year, so pwede siya dito, no? Okay, kailangan pataas siya. And then we need to also bring this, ibahin natin ang kulay. We also need to, pataas to, so we also need to bring this back to your present. Okay, so ito yung magiging niyan, cash flow diagram. Okay, so therefore the total cost for D, assuming that we also have to add yung ating salvage value here. So we have negative 415,000 plus or minus 27,400, and then yung factor natin uniform series, so that's 1 minus 1 plus 0.1 raised to negative 3 divided by 0.1. Okay, and then we add 26,000 and then 1 plus 0.1 raised to positive or negative 3. Okay, so from this, your CD, so expect natin na mas yan na of course may additional hindi lang puro negative kasi nga may positive, pero syempre yung ating initial cost is napakalaki, so we can still conclude kung better option yung ating D. Okay, so from this, the answer is negative 463 pesos. Actually, yung ibig sabihin lang naman dito ng negative sa ating sign, wala naman tayong negative na pera, diba? Ang ibig sabihin lang kasi ng negative na yun is with reference to your cash flow diagram, that is those are expenses. Okay, so we do have negative 463 and negative 477. Sabi natin sa rule number 2, if you take the absolute value of each of them, select the alternative with the less negative, the least absolute value, no? So from this case, we could select yung ating alternative D as our better option kasi nga yung kanyang absolute value is lesser. Or pwede nyong imagine lang yung Cartesian coordinate plane, and kung ano yung mas malapit sa 0, then that is the better option. But the question is which of this is the base alternative? So the answer is C, because C is the less better option, no? Kung may ganun mang word. Parang hindi lang siya maging worse option. So yun lang. So yun din yung explanation dito, no? Because alternative C has the larger negative PW, it is called the base alternative. And yeah, pwede yun na lang kahit wala na yung second sentence. So hopefully na-guess nyo yun natin by rule number 1 and rule number 2. Paki-edit na lang siguro to. Gawin nyo na lang tong C, CC, and CD para ma-consider natin na those are costs and not actually the present worth, because we don't have any revenues that are stated here. Yung kasing salvage value, di ba, we can consider, well, that's a benefit, but we can actually consider that really revenue naman. So it's still, though pwede rin siya sabing PW, pero since para maging ano tayo, consistent with the costs, so let's just use CW and CD, CC and CD. Okay, and I think you can answer letter number 3 here. Given na yung PWA dyan, B and C. So, pwede nyo na yung ma-evaluate, no?